My name is Harrison. I am 32 years old, and exactly 22 days ago, I paid nearly $400 for my own birthday dinner just to sit at a table while my entire family took turns destroying me like it was a competitive sport. In the middle of a crowded, upscale restaurant, my own father stood up, raised his wine glass, and toasted to me being their biggest disappointment. They laughed right in my face. But there was one massive thing they did not know. The only reason they were not standing in the unemployment line or facing a brutal foreclosure right at that very moment was because I was quietly funding their entire fake rich lifestyle. And right now, their phones are blowing up with final notices, and they are begging me to stop the financial apocalypse I just unleashed on them. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect little world, hit that like button if you believe in karma and justice. And please, let me know where you are watching from down in the comments. I read every single one, and it helps to know I am not alone in this. Now, let us go back to the night it all shattered. It was a Tuesday evening. I had offered to treat everyone for my 32nd birthday, genuinely thinking we could just have a normal, quiet family dinner. It had been a long year, and despite everything, I just wanted one evening of peace. They picked an expensive Italian chain restaurant out in the affluent suburbs. It was not a 5-star luxury steakhouse, but it was pricey enough that I knew my wallet was going to feel the impact. I had been working in medical billing for years, making a modest salary, living in a tiny rented basement to save every penny I could. I showed up early that night. I wore a decent button-down shirt. I was actually looking forward to seeing them. I wanted to believe that for just one night, I could be a son and a brother, not just a punching bag. From the exact second they sat down, the atmosphere was thick with condescension. My mother, Beatrice, started things off before the waiter even brought the garlic bread to the table. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the slightly frayed collar of my shirt, and asked how the claim calls were going at my job. Her tone was dripping with pity, the kind of fake sympathy you give someone you secretly look down on. I took a breath and started to tell her about a promotion I was hoping to apply for, a step up into a management role that would significantly increase my salary. I was proud of it, but she cut me off completely before I could even finish my sentence. She leaned across the table, adjusted her designer silk scarf, and told everyone that when her friends at the country club ask what I do, she just tells them I work in tech. She actually used air quotes with her manicured fingers. She said telling people I handle billing disputes in a call center just sounds too depressing for a family with our reputation. My father, Montgomery, did not miss a beat. He jumped right in to brag about my cousin. He loudly announced to the entire table that she is a real estate agent who just closed on a massive commercial property down south. He looked right at me. His eyes narrowed into a judgmental squint, and said it must be nice to build equity and secure a real estate portfolio instead of renting a damp basement room from a stranger at my age. He said a real man owns his property. He said a real man does not live like a college student in his 30s. My sister, Clara, was sitting directly across from me. Clara is the kind of woman who measures human worth in designer labels and zip codes. She reached across the breadbasket, grabbed my smartphone without asking, and opened my banking app. I had left it running in the background after checking my balance in the parking lot. She tapped the screen, held it up high like a prize-winning trophy, and announced to the entire table that my checking account was overdrawn by $52. She laughed. It was a loud, piercing, vicious laugh that made the people at the next table turn and look at us. She told my brother Julian he should take a screenshot because who else shows up to their own birthday dinner this flat broke? Then came the moment that made my stomach physically drop. My father stood up. He picked up his expensive glass of red wine. He cleared his throat loudly to get everyone's attention. He looked at my mother, he looked at Clara, he looked at Julian. He looked at everyone except me. He raised his glass and said, "To our biggest disappointment, may he at least find a woman rich enough to keep him from moving back home." They all clinked their glasses together right over my head. My mother took a sip of her wine, set the glass down delicately, and casually added that she and my father had recently met with a lawyer to update their will. She looked at her plate, cutting into her chicken parmesan, and said they decided the inheritance would go entirely to the siblings who actually knew how to manage wealth. She said I would just blow any inheritance I ever got on cheap takeout and rent. She threatened my future financial security over a plate of pasta, using a lawyer and a will as weapons to keep me in my place. I did not yell. I did not flip the table. I did not even try to defend myself. I just sat there, frozen. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, a burning flush of absolute humiliation. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth physically ached. Nobody defended me. My brother Julian, the family golden child, just pointed his fork at me and smirked, telling me I needed to grow up and get a real career. I quietly flagged down the waiter and asked for the check. When the heavy leather folder arrived, the bill was just over $400. I pulled out my wallet and put my credit card down. It was the only piece of plastic I had that was not completely maxed out. My father patted his pockets, pretending to look for his wallet for about 2 seconds, before patting my shoulder and asking if I had it covered. Birthday boy. I nodded. I signed the receipt, leaving a generous tip for the waiter who had to witness my public degradation, and stood up. Outside in the freezing parking lot, the temperature had dropped significantly, but they all went back to pretending we were a loving, picture-perfect family. It was nauseating. My mother pulled me into a hug that smelled like expensive perfume and talked about Thanksgiving dinner plans as if she had not just threatened to cut me out of her will 20 minutes earlier. Julian slapped my back and told me to get a better job. Clara asked if I wanted the group photo she took right after the toast, the exact toast where my father called me a failure. Nobody apologized. Nobody asked if I was okay. They got into their shiny, expensive cars and drove off, leaving me standing alone under the harsh yellow glow of the streetlights. I walked over to my car, a 10-year-old sedan with a dent in the passenger side door and a heater that barely worked. I got in, parked, and sat in the dark with the engine off for a very long time. I kept hearing that word echoing in my skull, bouncing around my brain like a physical weight. Disappointment, disappointment, disappointment. I had spent my entire adult life trying to buy their love, trying to prove my worth, and they had just spent 2 hours proving to me that I was nothing more than a joke to them. A prop they used to make themselves feel superior. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered to life. I drove back to my rented basement on the bad side of town. I walked down the concrete steps to my apartment. It smelled faintly of mildew and old laundry, a stark contrast to the luxury they lived in. I did not turn on the main overhead lights. I did not take off my winter coat. I just walked straight to the small folding table I used as a desk, sat down in the cheap plastic chair, and opened my laptop. I sat there in the pale blue glow of the screen, staring at the bank accounts that had secretly ruled my life for the past 6 years. I thought about the inheritance my mother dangled over my head like a carrot. I thought about the lawyer they supposedly hired to cut me out of their will. It was hilarious, honestly. They were talking about wills and estates and generational wealth while I was the exact person keeping the roof over their heads. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was not sadness anymore. It was not even anger. It was clarity. Pure, unadulterated, blinding clarity. I realized that my loyalty was a sickness. I was setting myself on fire to keep them warm, and they were complaining about the smell of the smoke. It was time to cut the infection out entirely. I pulled up 3 accounts that I managed online. These were the invisible chains that held me down while lifting them up into high society. Then I picked up my phone and made 3 phone calls that would alter the course of my family's history forever. The first call was to a major mortgage lender. I sat on hold for 20 agonizing minutes, listening to terrible elevator music while my blood pounded in my ears. Finally, a representative picked up the line. I verified my identity, gave her the account number, and told her to remove my debit card from the autopay profile immediately. The woman on the line sounded confused. She noted that I was not the primary name on the deed, just the payment source. She politely warned me that without a new payment method, the account would go into default by the 1st of the month. She said late fees would apply and the foreclosure process could begin shortly after. I told her I understood completely and to delete the card. I thanked her, hung up, and felt a massive physical weight lift off my chest. Next, I called the auto finance company. This time, I did not have to wait on hold. I told the agent I was the co-signer on a luxury Ferrari, and that I was revoking my authorization for any future automatic drafts. The agent explained the consequences very clearly. She said if the primary borrower did not make the payment, the vehicle would enter delinquency, the repossession orders would be generated, and both of our credit scores would take a severe hit. I told her I did not care about my credit score anymore. I told her to let it burn to the ground. The agent processed the request, and the second the call disconnected, I felt a twisted smile form on my face. My final call was to Mr. Henderson, my landlord. He was an older, retired teacher who lived upstairs in the main house. He was a strict but fair man. It was late, so it went straight to voicemail. I left a message telling him I was giving my formal 30-day notice. I was moving out. I thanked him for being a good landlord and told him I would pay the final month in cash. I closed my laptop. The blue light faded, leaving me in total darkness. For the first time in my adult life, my money belonged to me. The pipeline was cut. The dam was broken. Now all I had to do was wait for the drought to hit them. When I laid down on my cheap mattress 2 hours later, nothing in their perfect little world had changed yet. They were probably still laughing about their clever toast, sleeping soundly in their beautiful suburban home. They had absolutely no idea that I had just yanked the only safety net they actually had right out from under them. Tomorrow morning, the countdown to their financial ruin would officially begin, and I was going to watch it happen without lifting a single finger. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. The greatest trick my family ever pulled was convincing the world they were successful while treating me like the family failure. But if anyone had bothered to look at my bank statements for the last 6 years, they would have seen a very different story. They would have seen a hostage situation disguised as familial duty. It all started when I was 26 years old. My father, Montgomery, ran a small commercial construction business. He loved being the boss. He loved walking into local HOA meetings acting like a real estate mogul. He wore custom-tailored suits, smoked expensive cigars imported from overseas, and spoke loudly so everyone in the room knew he was there. He wanted everyone to believe he was a self-made titan of industry. But the truth was his business was bleeding money rapidly. He was taking under-the-table jobs, mismanaging company funds, and trying to keep up an image he simply could not afford. One evening, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice did not have that usual booming arrogance. It was quiet. It was almost shaking. He told me they were a little short on the mortgage that month. He asked if I could help, just a temporary loan until some big commercial contracts came through. Their house is a massive 4-bedroom suburban colonial with a 3-car garage, a wraparound porch, and a meticulously landscaped lawn. The mortgage was nearly $3,000 a month. My mother, Beatrice, worked part-time at an upscale clothing boutique, but her paycheck barely covered her country club lunches, her weekly spa days, and the luxury groceries she insisted on buying just to impress the neighbors. I was making a very average salary at my medical billing job. It was not a massive income, but I lived so cheaply that I had built up decent savings. I loved my parents. I did not want them to lose their home. I did not want my mother to face the humiliation of foreclosure and have her precious reputation ruined in front of her friends. So, I logged into my bank portal and set up an automatic wire transfer directly to their mortgage servicer. I told myself it was just for a few months. I believed him when he said the business would bounce back. But a few months turned into a year, then 2 years, and then 6. Every single month, over $1,000 vanished from my paycheck before I even saw it. That is why I lived in a basement. That is why I bought my clothes at Walmart. That is why I ate ramen noodles 4 nights a week while my father bragged to his friends about his golf handicap. I was silently keeping a roof over their heads, destroying my own youth and my own future to preserve their illusion of wealth. I found out later from a relative that my mother knew exactly how broke they were the entire time. She knew the construction business was dead. She just refused to give up her lifestyle, and she knew I was soft enough to manipulate. She deliberately kept me feeling small, kept me feeling like I owed them, just so I would never stop paying the bills. She weaponized my empathy to fund her vanity. She would constantly remind me how much they sacrificed to raise me, planting seeds of guilt so deep in my mind that I felt like a criminal whenever I thought about stopping the payments. And then there was Julian. Julian is the golden child. He is 2 years older than me, and he has never done a wrong thing in his life according to my parents. 4 years ago, Julian landed a new sales job at a high-end logistics firm. He convinced himself he needed a luxury vehicle to impress his clients. He said you have to dress for the job you want, and apparently you have to drive the car of the man you want to be. He went to a high-end exotic car dealership and picked out a sleek, cherry-red Ferrari. The problem was Julian's credit score was absolute garbage. He had maxed out credit cards, a history of missed payments, and a lifestyle built entirely on debt. The dealership laughed him out of the finance office when they ran his credit check. That night, my mother called me crying. She was hysterical. She said Julian's entire career depended on this car. She said he was on the verge of a massive promotion and a good brother would step up and help his family succeed. She manipulated me for over an hour on the phone, twisting my sense of loyalty until I felt like a monster for even thinking about saying no. She said it was just a formality, a signature on a piece of paper. I went to the dealership the next day and co-signed the loan for the Ferrari. Julian swore on his life I would never have to pay a single dime. He hugged me, called me the best brother in the world, and drove off the lot in a car that cost more than I made in 3 years. Within 3 months, the lender was calling my phone. Julian was missing payments. He was dodging their calls, sending them straight to voicemail. Instead of letting the loan default and ruining my own credit score, I went online and paid it. This happened over and over again. Every time I confronted him about the missing money, my mother would intervene. She insisted I keep it a secret. She told me I could not tell Clara or Aunt Vivian because it would embarrass Julian and cause family drama. She framed it like I was doing a noble, silent duty. She said Julian was just going through a rough patch, he was under a lot of pressure at work, and the family needed to protect him. So I paid. I watched my bank account drain every month to fund a supercar I was not even allowed to drive. I was subsidizing his arrogant playboy lifestyle while I was taking the public bus on days my old sedan broke down. I was his personal bank, and he treated me like an annoying debt collector whenever I asked him to contribute. They got to look down on me. They got to mock my old car and my cheap shoes. They got to call me a failure at every single family gathering, every Thanksgiving dinner, every holiday party. Meanwhile, my sweat and my stress were the concrete foundation keeping their entire lives from collapsing into dust. The psychological toll was unbearable. I was living in a constant state of financial panic, terrified of any unexpected expense because my margins were so incredibly thin. I did not have a 401k. I did not have a college fund for future kids. I had nothing but a massive pile of family debt that I was servicing in secret. I was exhausted, physically and mentally drained from carrying the weight of 4 adults on my shoulders. I lost sleep. I lost weight. I lost my sense of self-worth. The reason my bank account was negative $52 on the night of my birthday dinner was the ultimate twisted joke. 3 days before the dinner, my mother called me in an absolute panic. The county had issued a final warning about unpaid property taxes, and they were drastically short on cash. If the taxes were not paid, a lien would be placed on the house. She cried, saying she couldn't face the neighbors if a notice was nailed to their door. I drained every single cent I had in my checking account to cover their tax bill. I literally gave them my last dollar so they would not lose their precious suburban mansion. And their thank you was dragging me to an Italian restaurant, forcing me to pay for my own birthday meal on a high-interest credit card, and having my sister Clara parade my negative bank balance in front of the entire dining room while my father called me a disappointment. They took my money to save their home, and then they publicly executed my dignity for sport. Sitting in my cold basement after making those 3 phone calls, the fog of manipulation finally lifted completely. I saw them for exactly who they were: parasites, emotional and financial vampires. They did not love me. They loved what I could do for them. The family loyalty they preached was nothing but a chain they used to keep me tied to their sinking ship. They needed me to be the loser so they could be the winners. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The automatic drafts were canceled. The money was finally staying in my account. The pipeline of cash that fueled their arrogance was permanently severed. All I had to do now was weather the storm that was about to hit. I knew they would come for me when the bills bounced, but this time I was ready. I was done being their shield. The fuse was lit, and the explosion was inevitable. The fallout did not happen immediately. The rest of November dragged on. I went to work, processed my medical claims, and ignored the casual texts from my mother about what side dishes I should bring to Thanksgiving dinner. I did not reply. I did not go. I sat in my basement eating a frozen turkey dinner, listening to the absolute silence of a man who finally has his own life back. It was the most peaceful Thanksgiving I had ever experienced. Then the calendar flipped to the first of the month. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. At exactly 9:15 in the morning, my phone vibrated loudly on my desk at work. I looked down. It was a text from my mother, Beatrice. It read, "Did you change your bank card? The auto pay for the house did not go through. The bank tried to pull from your dad's account and overdrew it. Please fix this ASAP." 10 minutes later, another text arrived, this one more urgent. "Harrison, answer me right now. The bank is charging us a $35 overdraft fee. Call them and fix your card. Your father is furious." I read the messages, placed my phone face down in my desk drawer, and went back to typing. I felt my heart rate increase slightly, a residual effect of years of conditioning, but I did not reach for the phone. By noon, my father was leaving voicemails. I checked them during my lunch break, sitting in my car in the parking lot. His tone went from confused to irritated to downright furious. He left a message snarling about how he hated dealing with incompetent bank tellers. He said he went down to the branch and yelled at the manager because the payment bounced. He demanded I sort out my card issues before it affected his credit score. It was almost comical. They still thought it was a technical glitch. They could not fathom that their personal ATM had simply decided to walk away from the machine. They were so blinded by their own entitlement that the idea of me voluntarily cutting them off never even crossed their minds. I did not answer a single message. I let the phone vibrate until the battery died. I felt a strange, intoxicating sense of power building in my chest. For the first time in my entire life, I was the one holding the cards. I was communicating my boundaries through pure, unbreakable silence. I was letting the reality of their bankruptcy wash over them, one bounced check at a time. When my shift ended at 5 o'clock, I walked out of the sliding glass doors of my office building into the crisp evening air. The parking lot was starting to empty out. I headed toward my old sedan, keys in hand, ready to go home to my quiet basement. Suddenly, a large figure stepped out from between two parked cars, completely blocking my path. It was my father, Montgomery. He looked disheveled, which was a rare sight. His expensive custom suit was wrinkled, and his silk tie was pulled loose around his neck. His face was red, and he was breathing heavily, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He demanded we talk, keeping his voice low but dripping with absolute venom. Other employees were walking past, glancing at us nervously, sensing the intense hostility radiating off him. I stopped, keeping a safe distance between us. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he was just an old man pretending to be a giant. He was a fraud, and without my money he was nothing. I told him flatly that I had somewhere to be. He slammed his hand flat onto the hood of my car. The sound echoed loudly in the quiet parking lot. He demanded to know why the mortgage company was saying the payment profile was deleted. He said they sent a warning letter to the house today via certified mail. He asked what the hell I did. I looked him dead in the eye. I did not feel intimidated. I did not feel that old childhood fear that usually paralyzed me when he raised his voice. I just felt exhausted by his existence. I told him calmly that I canceled it. I said I set it up 6 years ago as a temporary favor, and I decided to turn it off. His mouth opened and closed twice. He looked like he had been physically struck in the chest. He hissed that I could not just do that that they were counting on me, that business was slow, and I was going to make them lose the house over a child's tantrum. I gripped my car keys tighter, the metal digging into my palm. I asked him if he remembered my birthday dinner. I asked him if he remembered standing up with his wine glass and making a toast over my cake. His eyes darted away for a fraction of a second. The cowardice in him was palpable. He could not even own his cruelty. He muttered that they were just messing around, that he was just giving me a push to do better, to be more successful. I unlocked my car door. I told him to consider this my push. I said I was giving my biggest disappointment a little push toward financial independence. I told him to have a good night, got in the car, locked the doors, and backed out of the space while he stood there shouting my name at the top of his lungs. I drove away, watching him shrink in my rearview mirror until he was nothing but a speck. That night, the second bomb detonated. Julian finally checked his email and realized the Ferrari payment he assumed I had silently covered was severely past due. The grace period had ended, and the late fees were piling up. He called me from a different number so I would pick up. The second I answered the phone, he screamed into the receiver, asking if I was insane. He demanded to know if I stopped paying for the car because the finance company had just called him at work, interrupting an important meeting with a client. I kept my voice perfectly steady. I let him rage for a few seconds before I spoke. I told him it was his car, he drives it, and he needs to pay for it. I reminded him that he signed the loan paperwork, and his signature was on the dotted line, making him legally responsible. Julian lost his mind. He yelled that he did not have the cash this month, that I was screwing both of our credit scores just to prove some pathetic, jealous point. I asked him if he remembered laughing when Clara showed everyone my negative bank account. I asked him if he remembered standing by while Dad called me a disappointment in front of the entire restaurant. Julian yelled that it was a joke and that I was being psychotic. His voice cracked with genuine panic. He was terrified. The golden child was finally realizing that the gold was fake, and it was peeling off fast. I did not argue with him. I did not try to explain my pain. I did not ask for an apology because I knew it would be meaningless. Just empty words to get his car paid for. I just said, "Welcome to adulthood, Julian," and I hung up the phone. I blocked his number immediately. I knew Julian did not have the money. He spent everything he made on expensive watches, designer clothes, and buying rounds of drinks at upscale bars to look like a big shot to his fiancée, Penelope. He was drowning in his own vanity, living a lifestyle funded entirely by my suffering. I had just removed the only life raft keeping him afloat. The storm had officially arrived, and I was watching it from a safe distance, totally immune to the chaos. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous, and my family was about to show me exactly how vicious they could be. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Wallace, the security guard at my office building lobby. Wallace and I always chatted in the mornings about baseball and the weather. He was a good guy, a straight shooter. He sounded tense on the phone. He told me there was a guy out front making a massive scene, claiming to be my brother, demanding to come up to my floor to see me. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my department and looked down at the visitor parking lot. Down below, Julian was pacing furiously on the sidewalk. But he was not alone. A heavy-duty tow truck with flashing yellow lights was backing up to his precious cherry-red Ferrari. I watched, feeling a cold, hard sense of justice wash over me as Gus, the repo man, hooked the thick metal chains under the chassis of the supercar. Julian was screaming, waving his arms frantically, trying to physically block the tow truck driver from securing the vehicle. Wallace and another security guard had stepped outside to keep Julian away from the building and out of the repo man's way. Standing a few feet away, arms crossed, was Penelope, Julian's fiancée. Even from 3 stories up, I could see the absolute disgust on her face. She yelled something at Julian, pulled the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger, threw it directly at his chest, and walked away toward the street, hailing a cab. Julian looked up. He saw me standing in the window. I could see the absolute rage and terror on his face. His perfect life was crumbling on the pavement. He pointed at me, screaming something I could not hear through the thick glass. I did not wave. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just watched his status symbol, the machine I had paid for with my own sweat and dignity, get dragged away down the avenue. The repo truck pulling away was not just taking a car. It was taking Julian's entire fake identity. It was taking his engagement, his pride, and his illusion of success. My brother was finally walking on his own 2 feet, and the reality of gravity was hitting him hard. The golden child was tarnished. The week after Julian's Ferrari was repossessed, my family lost whatever shred of sanity they had left. They transitioned into a full-blown tactical assault. They realized I was not bluffing. The ATM was permanently out of service. My mother drove across town and showed up at my rented basement. I was not home, but Mr. Henderson, my landlord, was outside fixing a broken sprinkler head. Mr. Henderson told me later that she marched up the driveway demanding to be let into my apartment. She told him I was having a severe mental breakdown and stealing money from the family business. Mr. Henderson, a retired guy who took zero nonsense from anyone, calmly informed her that he was not authorized to let anyone into a tenant's unit without a police warrant. When she tried to push past him toward my door, he pulled out his phone and threatened to call the police for trespassing. She peeled out of the driveway in a rage, leaving black tire marks on the asphalt. Since they could not get to me physically, they used their proxies. They enlisted the flying monkeys. My Aunt Vivian started leaving me voicemails from the back room of the hair salon she managed. The messages were dripping with venom and fake righteousness. She accused me of destroying my parents' twilight years, calling me ungrateful, selfish, and cruel. She said I was ruining the family name and that I would burn in hell for abandoning my mother in her time of need. She threatened to exclude me from the family funeral plots. Then I received a text from my mother. It was brief and terrifying in its finality. She wrote that if I did not call my father, apologize, and fix the bank accounts by noon today, I was no longer her son, and she would erase me from the family forever. She threatened a lawsuit for emotional distress. The pressure was suffocating. They were gaslighting me on an industrial scale, trying to make me believe that holding on to my own paycheck was a criminal act of violence against them. They wanted me to break. They needed me to break. I read my mother's message while sitting in the break room at work. The fluorescent lights buzzed aggressively above me. For a brief, terrifying second, the little boy inside me wanted to surrender. The conditioning was so deep. He wanted to pick up the phone, apologize for causing trouble, and transfer the money just to make the screaming stop, just to have a family again, even a toxic one. It is incredibly hard to undo decades of psychological abuse. Just then, Naomi, a senior analyst who sat a few desks down from me, slid a fresh cup of hot coffee across the table. Naomi was sharp, kind, and incredibly observant. She sat down opposite me, looked at my pale, sweating face, and asked what was wrong. The dam broke. I did not cry, but I told her everything. The words poured out of me. The birthday dinner, the secret mortgage payments, the Ferrari repossession, the threats of disownment, the lawsuit threats over the inheritance, custody of my own finances. Everything. Naomi did not offer empty platitudes. She did not tell me that family is family. She looked at me with fierce intensity and asked one simple question. If these people were strangers you met on the street, would you let them treat you like this? I whispered no. She asked why sharing DNA gave them a free pass to destroy my life and steal my future. She pulled her laptop toward her and told me I had 6 years of specialized medical billing experience, that I was meticulous, highly skilled, deeply underpaid, and suffocating in this toxic town. She said I needed a promotion, not just in my career, but in my life. For the next 3 days on our lunch breaks, Naomi helped me rebuild my professional resume from the ground up. She highlighted my strengths. She forwarded me a listing for a remote position at a fast-growing health tech startup based on the West Coast. The salary band was significantly higher than anything I had ever seen. It was life-changing money. I applied that night. Within 48 hours, I had a remote video interview scheduled with the CEO of the company. I knew I could not do the interview in my basement. I knew my mother or Julian might show up and start pounding on the door mid-sentence, sabotaging my only way out. So, I packed my life into the trunk of my old sedan. Everything I owned fit into 2 suitcases and 3 plastic bins. I drove to the other side of the city and checked into an extended stay hotel, paying for a month in cash in advance to avoid any paper trail. I set up my laptop on a tiny desk in the hotel room with a blank beige wall behind me. I was terrified. My hands were shaking as I clicked the link to join the video call. But for the first time in my life, I was moving forward, and I was absolutely determined to never look back. The storm was raging outside, but inside that hotel room, I was building my own calm. The morning of my interview, I woke up in that sterile extended stay hotel room hours before the sun even thought about coming up. The walls were a dull, lifeless beige. The carpet was completely worn down near the heavy wooden door, and the ancient mini fridge in the corner hummed with a loud, metallic rattle that vibrated through the floorboards. But as I lay there in the dark, staring up at the popcorn ceiling, it felt like an absolute sanctuary. Nobody knew where I was. There were no aggressive knocks on my door, no manipulative voicemails from my mother demanding I surrender my paycheck, no arrogant texts from my father telling me I was a failure. For the very first time in 6 agonizing years, the air in my lungs actually belonged to me. I was not breathing for them anymore. I took a long, incredibly hot shower, letting the steam clear out the residual panic that had lived in my chest since the birthday dinner. I put on a crisp, perfectly ironed white dress shirt, adjusted my collar, and meticulously checked the framing on my laptop camera to make sure the background behind me was completely blank. I needed this job. I did not just want it. I needed it as a lifeline to pull myself entirely out of the toxic financial quicksand my family had dragged me into. When the video call connected, I was face-to-face with Victor, the CEO of a rapidly growing health tech startup based out on the West Coast. Victor was a pragmatic, sharp, and intensely direct man who did not waste a single second with meaningless small talk. He looked down at his screen, reviewing my resume, then looked directly into the camera and immediately started asking incredibly tough, complex questions about revenue cycle management, insurance denial codes, and how to optimize billing software to prevent massive healthcare corporations from exploiting tiny loopholes. He was testing me. He was pushing to see if I was just another applicant exaggerating on paper. I did not stumble. I did not second-guess myself or let my voice waver. I realized in that exact moment that all those years sitting in my damp basement, meticulously processing complicated medical claims to keep my parents from facing a massive lawsuit or a brutal real estate foreclosure, had turned me into an absolute expert in my field. I answered every single question with surgical precision. I walked him through a complete workflow overhaul I had designed months ago, a system my old boss had completely ignored because he was too lazy to implement it. I explained the exact metrics, the projected revenue recovery, and the compliance protocols. For the very first time in my entire adult life, I felt genuinely competent. I felt like a highly valued professional. I was not the family punching bag. I was not the guy who was supposedly too stupid to manage a basic checking account. I was a man who knew his immense worth and could prove it with raw data. By the end of the hour-long interview, Victor leaned back in his heavy leather executive chair, took off his reading glasses, and smiled a genuine, warm smile. He told me I knew my stuff better than senior analysts twice my age who demanded double the compensation. He said he did not want to waste time with second and third round interviews, dragging out the process while another company snatched me up. He offered me the position right then and there. He said human resources would send over the official, legally binding offer letter by the end of the day. The base salary was $72,000 a year, fully remote, with incredible benefits, health insurance, stock options, and a clear, structured path for a major promotion within the first 12 months. I muted the microphone for a fraction of a second. I closed my eyes, took a deep, shaking breath, and felt a single, hot tear roll down my cheek. It was a tear of pure, unadulterated relief. I unmuted myself, kept my voice perfectly steady, and told Victor that the offer sounded absolutely perfect. When that official offer letter hit my email inbox later that afternoon, I sat on the edge of the stiff hotel mattress and just stared at the glowing numbers on the screen. $72,000. It was real. It was tangible. I printed it out at the business center just to hold the paper in my hands. I had a new job, a massive new income, and the physical distance to start completely over. Because I was no longer draining over $1,000 a month to fund my father's fake real estate empire and my brother's cherry red Ferrari. This new salary meant I was going to be completely, untouchably financially independent. I thought the worst of the storm was finally behind me. I thought the absolute silence from my family over the last few days meant they had finally given up, contacted a bankruptcy lawyer to handle their mess, and accepted their inevitable fate. I was so incredibly wrong. The venom was just pooling in the dark, waiting for the exact right moment to strike. 2 days later, I drove to a massive, sprawling suburban grocery store on the edge of town to buy some basic supplies for my hotel room. It was a Tuesday evening, exactly 3 weeks since that horrific birthday dinner that changed everything. I was walking down the cereal aisle, pushing my metal cart slowly, actually feeling genuinely peaceful. The store was quiet, playing soft pop music over the speakers. I was mentally calculating how quickly I could build up my savings and maybe even start looking into buying some real estate of my own one day. I was dreaming about a future that finally belonged to me. Suddenly, a heavy shopping cart slammed violently into the front of mine. The metal clashed so loudly that an older woman standing near the oatmeal jumped, dropped a box, and looked over in pure shock. I gripped the handle of my cart tightly, bracing for a confrontation with a careless shopper, and looked up. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I could hear it in my ears. Standing right there, gripping the red plastic handle of her cart until her knuckles were stark, bone-white, was my older sister, Clara. She did not look anything like the smug, laughing, perfectly polished woman who had held my overdrawn bank account up like a trophy at that upscale Italian restaurant. She looked completely unhinged. She looked utterly exhausted. The dark, purple circles under her eyes were heavy and bruised-looking, like she had not slept a full hour in a week. Her expensive, salon-styled hair was tied back in a messy, greasy knot, and she was wearing a wrinkled trench coat over baggy sweatpants. But the physical exhaustion had not softened her toxic personality. If anything, the desperation had made her incredibly vicious and dangerous. She pushed her cart forward again with a sudden burst of aggressive strength, effectively pinning my cart against the heavy metal shelving unit holding the breakfast bars. She wanted me physically trapped in the aisle. She hissed at me, keeping her voice low but frantic, asking if I had any idea how hard it was to find me. Her eyes darted around nervously to see if anyone was listening to us, her obsession with appearances still intact even as her world burned. She said she had been driving around this side of town for 3 straight days, checking every grocery store and gas station, hoping I would show up because I was not at my basement apartment. She called me a coward. She asked what kind of sick man hides from his own flesh and blood when his family is in the middle of a catastrophic crisis. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her frantic, aggressive energy. I calmly placed a box of cereal into my cart, keeping my movements slow and deliberate to show her she had absolutely zero control over my nervous system. I told her I was not hiding. I told her I moved, and people move when they want to be closer to peace and quiet away from toxic environments. Clara let out a sharp, bitter laugh that echoed down the long aisle. She asked if I thought I got to have peace after what I did to Mom and Dad. She stepped around the side of her cart, closing the distance between us. She said they were literally losing their minds. She told me Dad was pacing the hardwood floors all night, drinking heavily, shouting at the walls. She said Mom was having severe panic attacks and refused to leave the house because she was terrified a neighbor might see her crying. She said the bank had sent a formal legal notice via a lawyer, and they were talking about immediate foreclosure proceedings. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my winter coat, and asked if I understood what that meant. She said they could lose the house, the neighborhood, their entire social standing. She said their entire lives, their entire legacy, were tied up in that real estate. I looked down at her hand gripping my coat. I didn't shake it off. I just stared at it until she felt the absolute coldness radiating from me and pulled it away. I looked her in the eyes and replied that I understood exactly how banks work. I said when you do not pay your bills, the bank takes the property back. I told her it was standard legal procedure and they should have planned better. Clara's face flushed a deep, angry, mottled red. She stepped even closer, invading my personal space, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at my chest. She told me this was not a joke. She said I canceled the automatic payments without telling anyone, pulling the rug out from under them in the dead of night just to punish them for one bad dinner. She accused me of acting like a spoiled, vindictive child throwing a temper tantrum. She said Dad was literally talking to an attorney right now to see if there was any kind of lawsuit he could file against the bank for predatory lending, or against me for emotional distress and breach of verbal contract. She said it takes a massive retainer fee to hire a lawyer, money they do not have right now because I selfishly cut them off without warning. She was so incredibly blind. She had lived in this thick, insulated bubble of arrogance for so long that she genuinely believed our parents were innocent victims of a cruel, unfeeling banking system, and that my hard-earned paycheck was somehow rightfully theirs by blood. She actually believed I owed them my salary as a tax for existing in their presence. I told her flatly that they do not need a lawyer. I said they just need to pay their own mortgage like normal adults. Clara snapped, her voice rising and echoing down the aisle, completely forgetting about the other shoppers. She screamed, asking with what money. She said I knew Dad's commercial business had been struggling with the changing real estate market for years. She said I knew Mom only worked part-time and couldn't possibly cover the bills. She claimed they were completely counting on that safety net I provided. And then she brought up Julian. She said I destroyed his life too. She said his Ferrari got repossessed right out of his company parking lot in front of his boss and all his co-workers. She said he was facing a massive hit to his credit, a potential lawsuit from the lender for the depreciation value, and that Penelope had broken off the engagement, taken the ring, and demanded full custody of the golden retriever they bought together. She said Julian could not even get approved for a basic apartment lease right now and had to ask Mom to dip into her retirement savings to help him secure a rental. And she said Mom could not even do that because her accounts were completely frozen by the bank due to the massive overdrafts I caused. She stood there panting, ranting, laying out the massive domino effect of my single decision to stop being their absolute doormat. It was actually fascinating to hear. It was like listening to a symphony of consequences. Every single tragedy she listed was simply the natural consequence of them living light years beyond their means. I was just the guy who finally turned off the counterfeit printing press. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. The final confrontation was about to happen right here, next to the oatmeal. I looked at my sister, feeling nothing but cold, clinical detachment. I did not feel the usual guilt that used to twist my stomach into knots whenever she raised her voice. I said Julian is a grown man with a salary. He signed the legal paperwork for a luxury vehicle. If he cannot afford the monthly premium, he should take the public bus like the rest of the world. Clara looked at me like I was a literal alien from another planet. She could not comprehend the words coming out of my mouth. She said family helps family. She said we share blood, and I was supposed to be loyal. She said Mom always told her I was the difficult one, the selfish one, the son who never quite fit into their perfect picture. But she never thought I would be this cold-hearted and cruel. She said Aunt Vivian was telling everyone in her salon that I was practically sending our parents to an early funeral with the extreme stress I was causing them. She said she could not believe I would abandon my own blood, my own parents, over a stupid, harmless joke about my bank balance. My voice dropped a full octave. The atmosphere in the aisle seemed to freeze. I stepped forward, forcing her to take a half-step back against her own cart. I told her it was not a joke. I said it was an execution. I reminded her that they humiliated me in public. I reminded her that they mocked my career, the career that was secretly keeping them afloat. I reminded her that she laughed and paraded my empty bank account around while Dad called me his biggest disappointment. I reminded her that Mom threatened my inheritance, talking about updating the will to cut me out, and told everyone I would just blow it anyway. Clara waved her hand dismissively, rolling her eyes as if she was swatting away a pesky fly. She told me to grow up. She said they were just trying to motivate me. She said I had been stuck in that dead-end medical billing job for years, renting a damp basement, owning absolutely no assets. She actually said they were trying to give me a reality check so I would finally do something with my life instead of being a financial burden on the family name. I looked at her. I really, truly looked into her eyes. I saw the absolute conviction there. She actually believed I was a failure. She actually believed I was the weak link in the family chain. They had all bought into the massive, fabricated lie our parents sold them to cover up their own catastrophic financial incompetence. It was easier to make me the scapegoat, to paint me as the loser, than to admit the king and queen of the suburbs were completely broke. I repeated the words slowly, tasting the bitter irony on my tongue. A reality check. Clara demanded that I fix this right now. She said I needed to call the mortgage company while she stood there. She told me to get my card back on file and pay the massive arrears before the end of the business day. She said if I did that, Mom promised she would forgive me. Mom would not even make me apologize in front of the whole family for causing this terrible drama. She said we could just pretend this whole ugly phase never happened, and I could still come to Thanksgiving dinner, and we would move forward as a family like nothing occurred. She was genuinely offering me a seat at the table of my abusers, assuming I would be desperate and grateful to take it. She thought the ultimate threat of being excluded from Thanksgiving dinner, of being alienated from her toxic presence, was enough to make me hand over my paycheck for the rest of my natural life. I gripped the handle of my cart. I felt the smooth plastic under my palms. I was not angry anymore. The fiery rage had burned out days ago, leaving nothing but cold, surgical precision. It was time to show her exactly who she was talking to. It was time to burn the grand illusion to the absolute ground. I looked Clara dead in the eyes, my posture completely relaxed, leaning casually against my cart. I asked her if she really wanted to talk about reality checks. My voice was so calm, so devoid of any emotion, that it seemed to deeply unsettle her. She stopped leaning forward and took another tiny half-step back, her eyes darting across my face looking for the brother she used to bully. She asked defensively what I was talking about. I reached into my winter jacket pocket and slowly pulled out my smartphone. It was the exact same smartphone she had violently snatched off the table at the Italian restaurant to humiliate me. I unlocked the screen with my thumb, but I did not open my checking account to show her my negative $52 balance. I opened a separate, highly secure folder on my home screen. A folder containing heavily downloaded PDF official statements from my primary bank account. I stepped much closer to her cart, closing the physical distance between us until she had nowhere to look but at the device. I told her she loved looking at my finances so much, she should take a really good look at this. I held the phone up right in front of her face. The screen brightness was turned all the way up, illuminating the dark circles under her eyes in the fluorescent light. I told her not to scroll. I just told her to read the highlighted lines. Clara narrowed her eyes, genuinely confused. She looked at the glowing screen. Her eyes scanned the first highlighted line of text. Transfer to Montgomery and Beatrice $1,200. Memo line, mortgage payment. Her brow furrowed deeply. She looked up at me and asked what this was. I instructed her quietly, firmly, to keep reading. She looked back down at the screen. Her eyes moved to the next highlighted line. Transfer to Auto Finance Corporation, $650. Memo line, Julian Ferrari payment. She read the next line. Transfer to Montgomery and Beatrice $900. Memo line, mortgage shortfall. She read the next. Transfer to Montgomery and Beatrice $1,200. Memo line, mortgage payment. I stood perfectly still in the middle of the grocery store aisle and watched her face carefully. It was like watching a massive, historic building collapse in extremely slow motion. The smug, aggressive posture she had maintained for the last 20 minutes began to completely crumble. The blood physically drained out of her cheeks, leaving her skin looking like pale ash. Her mouth parted slightly. She whispered that she did not understand. Her eyes were darting rapidly back and forth across the screen, reading line after line of massive money transfers. Hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, month after month. year after brutal, soul-crushing year. I kept my voice steady and completely devoid of any sympathy. I told her I would explain it to her very simply so she wouldn't get confused. I said for the last 6 years, I have been the sole reason our parents did not lose that massive house. I said Dad's commercial construction business went completely bankrupt a long time ago. I told her they have been living exclusively on maxed-out credit cards and my hard-earned paycheck. I said I transferred an average of $1,000 a month every single month directly to their mortgage lender just to keep the bank from chaining the front doors shut. Clara shook her head rapidly in denial, her hands trembling. She stammered, saying no, that Mom said they were doing fine. She said Dad just bought those brand new custom golf clubs. She said Mom just redid the entire back patio with imported stone for the summer parties. I did not let her finish her desperate rationalization. I corrected her immediately. I said they bought the custom golf clubs and the imported patio furniture with the money they saved by explicitly not paying their own mortgage. I said I bought those things for them with my suffering. I kept going, driving the final, devastating nail into the coffin of her reality. I said, and Julian, your precious golden boy brother, he never legally qualified for that Ferrari. I told her I co-signed the massive loan because Mom begged me. I said when he blew his commission checks on expensive tailored suits and buying rounds of drinks to impress his fake friends, I paid his car note so my own credit score would not get completely destroyed. I reached out and slowly scrolled down the PDF on the screen, revealing pages and pages of documented transactions. 6 entire years of financial servitude documented in undeniable black and white ink. I told her she asked why my bank account was negative at my birthday dinner. I leaned in just a fraction, making sure she heard every syllable. I told her it was negative because exactly 3 days before that dinner, Mom called me crying hysterically that the county property taxes were due and they were drastically short. I said I drained my entire checking account to cover it so a lien would not be placed on the real estate. I said I sat at that table, eating a dinner I paid for on a high-interest credit card, while she and the rest of the family laughed at me for being broke. I said you laughed at the exact guy who was quietly buying the roof over your heads and the luxury car in your brother's driveway. Clara stared blankly at the screen. A single, thick tear welled up in her eye and spilled over her lower lashes, tracking down her pale cheek. But she was not crying for me. She was not crying out of guilt for how she treated her younger brother. She was crying because the grand illusion of her perfect, wealthy, elite family had just been shattered into a million irreversible pieces. Her entire identity, built on superiority and zip codes and a fake inheritance, was a complete fraud. She whispered, her voice barely audible over the terrible grocery store background music, asking why they didn't tell her. She swore to God she had no idea. She said she was so sorry. She said the things she said at dinner, the screenshot of the bank account. She did not know the truth. I pulled my phone back, locked the screen, and slid it deep into my jacket pocket. The sudden absence of the glowing screen seemed to snap Clara back to harsh reality. I told her the truth was too humiliating for their massive egos. I said it is much easier to point at the son living in a damp basement and call him a massive disappointment than to admit to the world that you are financial frauds living off his charity. Clara reached a shaking hand out toward my arm. She stammered my name. I stepped back abruptly so her hand grabbed nothing but empty air. I looked at her with a coldness I did not even know I possessed. I told her it does not matter if she knew about the money. I said even if I was just a broke guy struggling to get by, the way she treated me was absolutely vile. I said they all showed me exactly who they are. I said they only respect money, and the exact second they thought I did not have any, they treated me like garbage. I said character is how you treat people who have nothing to offer you, and they all failed spectacularly. She looked completely broken, leaning heavily against the handle of her cart for physical support. She asked me, her voice trembling, what I was going to do now. I looked at her one last time. I said I already did it. I cut the cord. I told her I have a new job now, a massive salary bump, and I am moving out of this state. I told her she could go back and tell Mom and Dad that there is no lawyer, no lawsuit, no custody threat over my finances, and no emotional manipulation tactic in the entire world that will ever make me open my wallet for them again. I turned my cart around. I said, "Good luck with the foreclosure, Clara." I walked down the aisle, the wheels of my cart squeaking softly on the linoleum floor. I did not look back. I did not wait for her to apologize again. I left her standing there among the boxes of breakfast cereal, holding the shattered, worthless remains of her family's reputation. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Within an hour of that brutal grocery store encounter, the massive shockwave hit the rest of the family. Clara must have driven straight to our parents' house in an absolute panic and confronted them with the truth, because suddenly, the tone of the messages hitting my phone completely changed. The aggressive threats stopped. The arrogance vanished into thin air. The flying monkeys suddenly realized they had backed the wrong horse, and they were scrambling to get on my good side. Aunt Vivian, the one who had been loudly telling her hair salon clients that I was a monster and threatening to cut me out of the family funeral plots, sent me a massive, rambling text message. Clara had apparently shown her the exact screenshots of the bank transfers. Vivian's message was an absolute masterclass in cowardly backpedaling. She claimed she had been maliciously lied to. She said my mother had manipulated her, that she was deeply disgusted by how Beatrice and Montgomery had financially abused me all these years. She said she wanted to take me out to a fancy lunch to properly apologize. She even mentioned something about rewriting her own will because she did not want her sister getting a single dime of her real estate investments down the line. I read the long message, felt absolutely nothing but pure, unadulterated contempt, and deleted it without replying. They were all just parasites looking for a new host. The days following the grocery store confrontation were a masterclass in desperate, pathetic damage control by my parents. Once the terrible truth was out in the open and their wealthy facade was destroyed among the extended family, they did not have anywhere left to hide. My mother sent a long, rambling email from a burner account since I had blocked her main phone number and email address. She played the ultimate victim card, weaponizing her maternal status to the very end. She wrote paragraphs about how hard it was to raise 3 kids, how the changing economy had ruined my father's business, and how they only kept the truth from my siblings to protect them from adult stress. She literally tried to frame her financial abuse of me as an act of noble, self-sacrificing maternal protection. She ended the email by begging me to answer the phone. She said that the bank had officially started the formal foreclosure process. She admitted that the lawyer they consulted said they had zero legal standing to fight the bank, and that they had exactly 30 days to vacate the property before the sheriff showed up to forcefully lock the doors and throw their belongings on the lawn. My father sent exactly 1 text message from a new, unregistered number. It was classic Montgomery. It read, "I was under a lot of pressure at that dinner. I had too much wine. You know I did not mean it. We are losing everything, Harrison. Be a man and help your family." It was the exact same toxic manipulation he had used my entire life, challenging my masculinity, demanding my blind loyalty, refusing to take any real accountability for his own catastrophic failures. But the words had completely lost their power over me. They were just empty, desperate letters on a glass screen. I sat on the edge of my hotel room bed, opened the settings app on my phone, and systematically blocked every single new number, email address, and social media profile associated with them. I built a massive, impenetrable digital fortress around my peace of mind. The collapse of their empire was swift, brutal, and entirely of their own making. I only heard the final updates through a mutual acquaintance, a guy I used to play baseball with who still lived in my old neighborhood. The bank moved much faster than my parents anticipated. With no secret pipeline of cash to plug the massive holes in their debt, the massive colonial house went up for public auction. My parents were forced to pack whatever furniture they could fit into a rented moving truck and leave the affluent neighborhood they had lorded over for 2 decades. They did not get a single dime of equity out of the house. The sale of the property barely covered the outstanding principal, the massive legal fees, and the late penalties they had racked up. They had to move into a cramped, severely outdated two-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of town. Their credit scores were completely annihilated. There would be no more country club lunches, no more custom suits, just the harsh, unforgiving reality of living on a fixed, low income that they actually had to earn themselves. But Julian's situation was arguably the most disastrous of all. Without his flashy red Ferrari, he lost his superficial confidence, and without his confidence, his sales numbers at the logistics firm completely tanked. He was put on a performance improvement plan and eventually let go for missing quotas. But that was not the worst of it. The desperation made him reckless. In a panicked attempt to maintain his lifestyle and win Penelope back, Julian committed a massive, fatal error. He tried to apply for a high-limit personal credit card online, and because his own credit was destroyed, he actually forged my signature and used my social security number to apply as a co-signer without my knowledge. He was not very smart about it. The fraud alert system triggered immediately because the IP address did not match my location, and my credit files were heavily locked down. The bank flagged the application for identity theft. Julian is now currently facing a massive civil lawsuit from the credit card company and is under investigation for felony wire fraud because he could not secure a lease for a new apartment due to the vehicle repossession on his credit report. And with no income, he ended up having to swallow his massive, inflated pride and move into the tiny, windowless second bedroom of our parents' new dingy apartment. The golden child, completely stripped of his gold, facing legal ruin, living exactly the pathetic life he used to mock me for. And Clara, she was left to deal with the emotional wreckage entirely on her own. She had to watch the parents she idolized turn into bitter, broke roommates constantly fighting over grocery bills and lawyer fees. She tried to act as the family mediator, but without my money to smooth things over, the family dynamic collapsed into constant, vicious screaming matches. They had spent years telling the entire world I was the disappointment, but the moment the disappointment finally chose himself, their entire empire of dirt washed away in the rain. I did not stick around to watch them burn. I did not need to see the ashes to know the fire had done its job. The day after I signed my new employment contract, I packed the trunk of my old sedan, handed my room key to the hotel receptionist, and started driving west. The drive took 3 full days. It was just me, the open highway stretching out endlessly into the horizon, and a playlist of old classic rock songs. With every single state line I crossed, I felt a physical weight lifting off my shoulders. I was not running away. For the first time in my entire life, I was finally walking toward my own future. By the time I arrived in a sun-baked, beautiful suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, the dust back home had already settled into permanent ruin. 2 months later, I was standing in the middle of my new living room. The bright desert sun was streaming through the large windows, casting warm, golden light across the real hardwood floors. The apartment was not a massive mansion, but it was incredibly beautiful. It was clean, bright, and most importantly, it was entirely mine. I had spent the previous weekend at a local furniture store, paying with my own hard-earned money, picking out a comfortable sectional sofa, a solid oak coffee table, and a real, heavy bed frame. For the first time in my adult life, I was not sleeping on a cheap mattress pushed into the dark corner of a damp basement. I was living like a human being who mattered. My new job at the health tech startup was going incredibly well. The $72,000 salary felt like hitting the lottery every 2 weeks. Because I no longer had a massive, parasitic monthly drain on my finances, my bank account was growing at a rapid rate I had never experienced before. I sat down with a professional financial advisor and set up my own 401k to prepare for retirement. I started a robust emergency savings account so I would never be caught off guard again. I even started a small college fund for the kids I hope to have someday, making absolutely sure they will never have to sacrifice their youth to pay for my mistakes. I was finally building a solid, secure future instead of constantly paying for someone else's arrogant past. CEO Victor pulled me into a virtual meeting that morning just to tell me how deeply impressed the executive team was with my workflow optimization project. He used words like valuable, insightful, and leadership, It took me a few weeks to stop bracing myself for a hidden insult every time someone complimented my work. I was so used to my family tearing me down that praise felt dangerous. But I was slowly learning how to accept genuine respect. I was learning that I was actually a talented, capable man who deserved to be treated well. Sometimes, when I am sitting out on my balcony early in the morning, drinking hot coffee and looking out at the stunning desert mountains, I think about that birthday dinner. I think about the loud laughter. I think about the sound of the clinking wine glasses over my head. I used to wonder why they hated me so much when I was the only one saving them from total ruin. I used to think there was something fundamentally wrong with me, but I realize now, with the absolute clarity of distance, that it was not hate. It was deep, agonizing resentment. Deep down, my parents knew they were absolute failures. They knew they could not survive the real world without me holding their hands. And because their massive egos were too fragile to handle the heavy shame of relying on their youngest, supposedly weakest son, they had to constantly tear me down to maintain their illusion of superiority. They needed me to feel incredibly small so they could pretend to be big. They needed to believe I was a disappointment so they would not have to look in the mirror and face their own pathetic reflections. I asked myself the hardest question you can ever ask when dealing with toxic family members, the exact question that keeps so many good people trapped in vicious cycles of abuse. What do you owe the people who only loved the version of you that kept them comfortable? The answer is nothing. You owe them absolutely nothing. You do not owe your sanity to people who weaponize your loyalty. You do not owe your financial future to people who mock your current struggles. You do not owe a relationship to people who only call when they need a withdrawal. Blood makes you related, but respect, empathy, and strict boundaries make you a family. I had to completely amputate my entire family tree to save my own life. I had to walk away from everything I knew to discover everything I could be. And if I had to do it all over again, knowing the pain and the immense guilt I would have to push through to get here, the only thing I would change is that I would have done it 5 years sooner. I do not look back with regret anymore. The fiery anger has faded, replaced by a quiet, unshakable peace. I am not a disappointment. I am a survivor. And for the first time in 32 years, I am exactly where I belong, building a beautiful, peaceful life that they will never, ever be invited to ruin. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was not easy to relive those dark moments, to expose those raw wounds to the world, but I know there are people out there right now, sitting in a metaphorical basement, draining their bank accounts and their souls to please people who will never, ever be satisfied. Remember this, your worth is not defined by how much abuse you can endure in the name of family. You have the right to set hard, unbreakable boundaries. You have the absolute right to walk away from toxicity. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to cut off toxic relatives to save yourself from drowning? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and we can all learn from each other's strength. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Take care of yourselves, and remember, your peace is worth protecting at all costs.